Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and welcome to episode 40 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today, it's my distinct pleasure to have my good friend and colleague Adam Turteltaub from the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics. Adam has a wide range of jobs within the SCCE, and I've gotten to know him at various conferences. He's come down to Houston several times, and if you've been to the national conference, you know he's a big presence there. And so we are going to just visit about the SCCE, what Adam has seen from the compliance field over the past few years, different types of growth or other changes that he may have seen. And we're going to talk about the SCCE's upcoming European conference, which will be held in May. So with that, Adam, welcome. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me. And I should point out that at 6'6", I tend to be a big presence everywhere, even when I don't want to be.
Well, that's certainly true. Adam, could you tell our audience a little bit about your background, but how it sort of led to your current role at SCCE?
Yeah, I say what's funny about my background is I spent 2 years on Capitol Hill and 13 years in advertising, and if that's not a perfect background for a career in ethics, I don't know what is. But prior to joining the SCCE, I spent 7.5 years at LRN, which is a large compliance training provider, as I think most people know. And during the time there, a lot of my job was sort of collecting the stories of what the challenges were that people faced, as well as what was making things work or not. And I increasingly started speaking at conferences alongside LRN clients, prosecutors, and others, and really got to know the association that way. And once I learned that there was an opportunity to join it, I leapt at it, since for me the most rewarding part was always helping people understand what the challenges were, and then also what the solutions were out there. Because really what I saw is companies were struggling with various compliance issues and didn't seem to be able to find an answer. There quite likely was another organization that had solved that problem.
How long have you been with SCCE now?
It's been 5.5, almost 6 years now, so quite a while.
So you've been in the compliance profession, or at least in the compliance industry, for over 10 years.
Yeah, it's coming up on 13.
So what are some of the changes you've seen, both from the, or I guess from in the profession, but initially from the vendor perspective, and now from the perspective you have at SCCE?
I think the biggest change is a change of scope in terms of seeing what's possible or not. I mean, when I first started, there was a big question, believe it or not, of whether you could do mandatory compliance training. I mean, that was the first time LRN used to do an annual customer meeting. It still does, called the Knowledge Forum. And I remember the first year, the biggest topic was, could you even do mandatory compliance training? Most people didn't think it was possible within their organization. Compliance people didn't have the authority to require it. They didn't seem to feel like they had the leverage, that they could get the support of others. And, nowadays it's hard to imagine a major company of any size not having compliance training across the enterprise. And other issues that, the global program, the idea that you could train your workers around the world, it's still a real struggle logistically. But back then there were questions of, could you work through works councils and make this possible? Other issues that sort of were different back then that seem to have moved on is the idea of whistleblower hotlines everywhere. There's still obviously challenges in Europe. And I think another thing that's really significant is the number of issues that companies are addressing keeps expanding. So things like export controls really wasn't on the radar a few years ago, and now is one of the things that companies are concerned about. Data protection and privacy was a much smaller issue than it is today, and I think certainly after the breach at Target and other retailers, people are really looking at that issue a lot more closely, and it's gotten to be quite the hot area there. And finally, I think the big change is the elevation of the role of the compliance officer. Going back 12, 13 years ago, it tended to be someone in legal who had the job. Now increasingly we're seeing not only the compliance function as an independent role, but we're also seeing it reporting straight to the CEO and the board of directors. Really, that's just a dramatic change in terms of not only the visibility of the program, but a real measurement of how important companies now take compliance.
I've been a member of SCCE, I think, for 3 or 4 years now, but one of the things that's been clear in my short time as a member is just the growth of the organization, the growth of membership in the SCCE, and the growth at the national conference, where I believe last year you had the largest number of attendants, or at least registrants, for the national conference. Is that trend correct?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I mean, when I started, I think we had about 13 to 1,500 members, and now there's over 4,000. Last year, we had 25% growth approximately in terms of our membership. In terms of the annual meeting, we were up right around 20%. I can't remember if we were at 12 or 1,300 attendees. So it's just incredible to see it. And what's notable is also the international growth. When I last looked, I think it was 12% of our membership is outside of the U.S., and at this point, we're offering academies, which are our 3.5-day training courses on how to manage a compliance program, not only throughout the U.S., but we offer it in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Brussels, Belgium, Shanghai, and China, of course. And then last December, 2013, we offered our first academy in Dubai. And I think one of the things that really reflects the dramatic change in the growth of compliance on a global scale is when we did our first academy outside of the U.S., that was in Zurich, Switzerland in 2008, we had all of 17 attendees. When we did our first one in Dubai, we had 47 attendees. So we're really just seeing tremendous amount of interest in compliance. And a lot of it, honestly, is U.S. companies that have presence around the world and they need their compliance people trained. But we're seeing more and more companies not based in the U.S., and not even based in Europe, wanting to have a compliance program in place because they're seeing the need for it, and they're seeing that their partners, companies that they do business with, wanting to ensure that they've got a good, strong compliance program in place.
One of the things I'm asked about from time to time are certifications or evidence of educational level for compliance practitioners. And one of the things that the SCCE provides is a certification. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, and before I do, by the way, I forgot to mention we also have, as you alluded earlier, a general conference that takes place in Europe each year now, the European Compliance and Ethics Institute. But yeah, when it comes to certification, it's interesting. There was a lot of skepticism when the Certified Compliance and Ethics Professional designation was launched. A lot of people asked, why do we need this? Is there really a purpose to it? But the reality is, if you look at the other professions in the business world, certifications are fairly ubiquitous. I mean, obviously, attorneys need to pass a bar exam, but within HR, there's a certification. Within internal audit, within fraud examiners, within privacy, it's fairly standard. And the real strength of a certification is really twofold. One, it ensures the people who are doing the job have a good knowledge of the fundamentals of doing it. And secondly, it's a good way to demonstrate expertise, that your people who have a role weren't just handed a title, that they actually know what they're doing, know what they're talking about as they do the role. And it's critically important, I think, globally. We expanded and added the Certified Compliance and Ethics Professional International designation, which basically covers the same topic areas, but is it's not U.S. centric. It's not being driven by U.S. law. And we're seeing internationally people want that as companies, again, are doing business globally. One, multinationals based in the U.S. or Europe want to make sure their people operating far afield really understand what compliance is about and can demonstrate that to their peers. But also, we're seeing, again, these companies not based in sort of Europe and the U.S. wanting to make sure that the people running these new compliance programs truly understand what the expectations of the global business community are. It's also worth noting that outside the U.S., in many ways, a professional designation is more important than what college or university you went to. That's what their peers are looking for, is sort of the initials after their name are much more important than the diploma that's on the wall.
You talked about the Academy. You also mentioned the National Conference and now the European Conference. There's a couple of other events that I've attended through the SCCE. One we just completed here in Houston, the Utility and Energy conference, but there's also regional conferences that are one-day events. Can you explain the difference in those and what they might bring to the compliance practitioner?
Sure. The Energy and Utilities event, like the name says, is really designed for oil and gas folks as well as the utilities industry. They've got a lot of regulatory issues in common, and it provides an opportunity for people in those professions or those industries to get a conference that's really tailored to what their needs are. And we offer that in Houston every year because it's sort of the capital of the energy industry. In terms of the regional meetings, they're different than the others. Our other national meetings, we have an open call for speakers, and we have a committee that goes and reviews them. In the case of the regional meetings, what we do is we get a few compliance and ethics folks who've been around for a while to identify what are the issues that they're hearing coming up right there in their region that people are facing, and identify what the topics are and who are speakers locally who can address those topics. So that way you give an opportunity to sort of provide a focus onto what people are wrestling with in their region. So we end up, some issues are fairly common, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, anti-bribery, data protection, privacy, antitrust, sort of the basic issues come up. But you also get local issues and the opportunity to provide a little local color to things. So, for example, we just had a Phoenix regional meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the issue of managing social media came up. It's a fairly common topic these days. I just spoke at our Anchorage regional for the Healthcare Association, which is the sister association for SEC, on that topic. But in Phoenix, we were able to get the communications person from the Arizona Diamondbacks to talk about it. You know, baseball teams, players are employees, but they've got all kinds of latitude. And obviously, as we've all seen, sometimes athletes say great things on Twitter, some things not so great.
Yes, last year the Houston Astros, the beloved Houston Astros, I should note, sent out a tweet for a Women's Day at the ballpark where they said women could learn about baseball, and the fallout from that, from women who knew more about baseball than most of the Astros, did not do very well, and they clearly could have used some advice along those lines. One of the things that has intrigued me, struck me, the first national conference I attended was really two things. And I'd like you to comment on these, both from your perspective from LRN and now SCCE. But the first thing that struck me was the price. The price is below every other national conference there is, and that was clearly a decision made, maybe Roy or the board or somebody a long time ago, but it stands out because of its value. But the second thing that struck me was how integral the vendors are a part of the conference experience. They're right up front. The vendors are in a room where all of the social events are held. The nighttime cocktail get together, the coffee, the refreshments, all of the breaks are with the vendors, and the vendors seem to me to be a part of the solution. Whereas in other conferences I've seen, they really are in the back of the bus, in the back of the room, and they're to be seen but not heard from. How was your experience with that?
Well, it's an interesting thing. Obviously, coming from the vendor side, one of the reasons why I pursued this opportunity was I felt welcome. And one of the things about the way the SCCE operates is there's no second-class citizens. Membership is the same price whether you're the chief ethics and compliance officer at a large company or a small company, or you're a vendor or a consultant or an independent practitioner, lawyer, whatever you are. It's $295. Our philosophy is very strongly that we're here to serve the compliance profession as a whole. And so one of the things we want to do is make sure they feel welcome. So one of the things you don't see is that in terms of our pricing for vendors to exhibit, it's also much lower than what the norm is. And frankly, when I joined the association, I told Roy Snell, the CEO, that says, look, now that I'm no longer a vendor, I can tell you, your prices are so low, we should be charging what others did. And he said, no, we're here for everyone. I don't want this to be a club that's only a few select vendors can afford. And we're here to support the profession as a whole, including those outside. And I'd rather have a big full exhibit hall than a small one for just the few and the rich. And I think it ends up serving the in-house compliance people a lot better, because when they go to a conference, yes, they're there for the sessions and to network, but they're also to see what's available to solve their problems. And you can see a lot more of those solutions if we keep the price affordable. And that's why the exhibit hall remains full. With that said, I would also point out that one of the things we do is we keep marketing separate from speaking and writing. So there's no charge ever to speak or write at a conference. And likewise, just because you're a platinum sponsor whose name is, on the bag or on the wall, or, some other tchotchke that's given away, it doesn't entitle you to anything in terms of speaking. Speaking and writing is judged on the merits.
Right.
In terms of the pricing of meetings, it's really, I think, the same philosophy. I mean, we're nonprofit, but we do have to generate our revenues. We don't get donations and grants and things like that. It comes from meetings and membership. And the idea there is to keep it as affordable as possible. As I mentioned, we have a sister association, the Healthcare Compliance Association, which is actually older and much larger. It's got about over 8,000 members to it. And the pricing really reflects what's been done there. And I think one of the things that's helped the growth tremendously is the fact that it is so affordable for people to attend our programs.
One of the things that I've always enjoyed about the national conference is you bring in people who are really outside the compliance profession to talk about issues that certainly touch ethics and perhaps compliance as well. You brought in notable authors, but the one I really like to ask you about was in Las Vegas, I believe, 2 years ago, where your brother and a couple of other Hollywood types came and talked to us about ethics. How did that come about, and what were you trying to garner through that?
Well, I think when we were trying to think of keynote sessions, we always want to have something that's provocative. So like the year before, we had Rick Harrison of TV's Pawn Stars, who came there because we started noticing, a few of us in the office watched it, that compliance issues came up. Turns out pawn shops have enormous amounts of compliance regulations. Every purchase, every loan that they make, the person has to be run against a Patriot Act database. Every time somebody pawns something, the data gets uploaded to the Las Vegas Police Department that nightly. I mean, I don't think too many compliance officers deal with an enforcement authority monitoring their transactions on a daily basis. And people really like that a lot. And it sort of struck me, based on my background, that there was more overlap here than people think. My father produced TV shows ranging from That Girl to Sanford and Son and What's Happening. And, TV shows, a lot of times sitcoms are 30-minute morality plays where a character faces an ethical issue or a legal dilemma, and they have to resolve it in 30 minutes. And what struck me when I thought about that and movies too is, what's funny is you tell people at work you have to do ethics training, and their reaction is, I know that stuff, I was taught that as a kid, it's boring, whatever. And then they rush home to watch the latest episode of The Big Bang Theory, for example, where these issues are in play, where the character's deciding what's wrong. Or they watch The Simpsons, where I love Homer because he's missing that little voice inside our head that says don't. And I thought that was great, so I invited Jay Kogan, a childhood friend who's produced The Simpsons and a whole bunch of shows. And then my brother directed, as you know, the National Treasure movies, Las Vegas, which Morgan Freeman and Robert De Niro, Michael Douglas, and Kevin Kline was just out. And what was actually nice after I asked him to do it was the fact that he was shooting a movie in Las Vegas, and they were shooting it at the Aria, which is where the conference was. So I wasn't really asking my brother that big of a favor. But, you look at his movies, what to me is extraordinary is I said people say they only want to work with good, decent people, but we end up rooting for people who break all the rules. I mean,
Right.
National Treasure is a great one. Here's a guy who steals the Declaration of Independence, and we want him to do it. Now, we do it because it's this great mystery, and we know it's a movie, but it does ask the question, what happens in the workplace? Because a lot of times the person who's breaking the rules is seemingly doing it for the good of the company and may think he's helping or she is helping the company at that point, not realizing what the downside was. And it seemed like a good way to get people thinking in different ways about this and also, get people talking and provide a way to get people to start talking with strangers and sharing ideas with each other. Of course, I will say my parents were there too, and my family still doesn't fully understand what I do. But that's the nature of compliance. Good luck explaining it to outsiders.
I'd like to turn to the European conference that you mentioned. I've been contacted by several European compliance practitioners inquiring about compliance conferences in Houston, in the United States that they might attend, and I've directed them to the SCCE and the European conference. Can you tell us sort of how that event began, but really where it is now and what it could bring to the European compliance practitioner, or I guess compliance practitioner outside the United States?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that led to it. One, obviously, is we were growing more globally. We felt it was time to do more other than the academies outside the U.S. Secondly, people who have earned a certification need to have 40 hours of continuing education credits every 2 years, and we had more and more in Europe with them and looking for ways to get it. Now, you don't have to get the hours from us. You can go to any pretty much industry conference, fill out a form on our site afterwards and request credit for it. And if it's compliance related, generally you get the credit. But we wanted to do more and serve them, and as we grew globally, to have more of a presence there. And so we started looking around, realized London was probably a good place to do it for the first time, and wanted to sort of mirror what we did in the U.S., albeit on a much smaller scale to start, where we had a general compliance conference that covered the range of issues. What I have to admit we didn't realize until we did the program and got people's feedback was it filled a huge gap in the marketplace. Throughout Europe, there tends to be single-issue conferences. There's a conference, say, on antitrust, or a conference on data privacy, or one on anti-corruption. What they lack is the general sort of soup to nuts on a wide range of compliance and ethics issues that are out there. And the feedback was great. We were hoping to get about 75 people for the first one. We got 90 this year. Enrollments are running 20 to 30%, I believe, ahead of where we were last year at this time, because I think people were doing it, and we've actually expanded it. Last year we just did a single track of sessions from start to finish. This year we've expanded it to 2 tracks of sessions with some general sessions, including one I'm really looking forward to, which is Michael Woodford, who was the Olympus former CEO. It was a very rare case where the CEO ended up being the whistleblower.
Right. Adam, we're near the end of our time, so I was wondering if any of our listeners wanted to find out more information about the SCCE or any of the conferences. Where might they go?
Our main website is just corporatecompliance.org is the best place to go. And if they want to email me directly, unfortunately my last name is a difficult one, but you can email me at adam.turteltaub, and that's spelled TURTEL. TAUB at corporatecompliance.org. But again, most of the information is on the website, pretty much everything you need, from where the conferences are to some basic membership information to some of our brochures, including, as you point out, our code of conduct for compliance and ethics professionals.
And I'd just like our listeners to note that the SCCE rather, just came out with a new version of the compliance handbook. It is the best, in my mind, one-stop resource for putting together a compliance program, doing risk assessment, all of the nuts and bolts of compliance. It's written by various practitioners who definitely know what they're talking about, and it has a wealth of forms, indices, and other materials that you can use to really create a first-class compliance program. So it's worth its weight just for that, and an extraordinarily affordable price, I would also note. So,
thank you.
With that, Adam, we're at the end of our time. I'd like to thank you very much for visiting with us today. My name is Tom Fox, and if you want to reach me, I'm available at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Thank you very much.